We want to welcome Harriet Welty Rochefort as our guest speaker today. Many of you remember that Harriet visited the Alliance Française of Memphis in 2013, that long ago, I don't believe it, to present a talk on her book, Joie de Vivre. In fact, she's the author of 3 nonfiction books, French Toast, French Fried, and Joie de Vivre, all published by St. Martin's Press. Final Transgression, the topic of today's talk, is her first nonfiction book. Her first fiction book, published by Understand France and available on Amazon and our local bookstore. Harriet grew up in Iowa, traveled to France after graduating from college and never left. She's also worked as a freelance journalist, writing on business, culture, travel, and lifestyle for major newspapers and magazines, and regularly speaks on Franco-American cultural differences. And we're fortunate that she has agreed to speak to our group exclusively today. I'd like to welcome her and her interviewer, Maggie Mixon.
Thank you. Thank you, Teresa. Is the speaker on me now? Can you see me speaking? Good. I want to go back to being in Memphis at the Alliance Française in 2013. I just cannot believe it's been so long. I can't even believe how long it's taken me to write this book, but we'll talk about that later. But anyway, I have very fond memories of being in Memphis. We had a great time, and you really welcomed me so nicely. So tonight, I'm very happy to be here to speak about my first novel, my latest book, and my first novel, which is Final Transgression. And Maggie Mixon, my interviewer and a young student at the American University in Paris, is here to interview me tonight. We'll have a few slides and we'll finish that presentation, and then we'll open it up to questions that you can put on chat from now on. Okay, so Maggie, if you want to start the interview, you can now.
Yes, fantastic. Well, thank you for being here, Harriet, and thank you for hosting us, Teresa. My first question for you, Harriet, is that we've seen lately this onslaught of historical fiction, namely about World War II and with female protagonists. So I'm wondering what makes Final Transgression different from those other books and other books in general regarding World War II.
Good question, Maggie, because there are so many books out there on World War II and France and strong women and heroines that you would say, why would anybody write one more? But I think my book is very different. It does take place in France. It does take place in France during World War II, especially at the end of the book. But the protagonist is a woman who is not a resistant, and she is not a collaborationist, and she's not Jewish. She's this ordinary young French woman who is beautiful and high-spirited, and whose only goal in life is to start a family and have a baby. And she is apolitical, and she thinks that she can go through the war, especially with this attitude that she's proved wrong. But I absolutely wanted to take someone who was ordinary, just an ordinary person trying to get through an extraordinary time, because war, of course, it's always extraordinary. I will make some parallels in this talk to the coronavirus, because there are a few things that war and coronavirus have in common. So that's one thing about this ordinary woman. And the second thing that makes my book different, and really different, I think, is that the end of it, especially the end of the book, is the end of the war. And at the end of the war in France, there was a period called l'épuration sauvage. And épuration, it's like purification or purges. And what were those purges? They were, it was a period in which people were getting rid of the bad people. So the resistance, who were brave and heroic and sacrificed themselves, were going around shooting, killing suspected collaborators without a trial. Now, that is a period of history that has not been written about. I don't think it's been written about in fiction. It's been written about a lot in nonfiction, in French especially. But it's something that was very important, but I haven't seen in any of the fiction books I have read on World War II in France. So that was another point of interest for me too. And of course, this is inspired from a family story, but I think we'll talk about that a little bit later. So,
Well, that actually is my next question. Where did you get the inspiration for this story about this ordinary woman in this period of history that's kind of little known within the States, at least?
yes, absolutely. Well, I got the inspiration from my husband's family. My husband is French, obviously. I say obviously because I've lived here for 50 years now. My goodness. And I'll tell you the story of how I got onto this story. Uh, First of all, I've been a journalist for many, many years, and I know a good story when it's around. So one day I was at my mother-in-law's place in the country, and I went in her bedroom, and I saw on the mantle of the fireplace a picture of a woman I had never seen before. She was young and she was beautiful, and she was dressed the way you're dressed in World War II, and the fashions were different. And I said, "Oh, who is that beautiful woman?" And she said, "Oh, that was my sister." And I said, "Oh, well, what happened to her?" Because I'd never heard her mentioned or anything. And she said, "Well, she died during the war." And that was the end of it. Now, also as a journalist, I know I can pick up on things maybe in a way that, well, maybe it's what they call a déformation professionnelle. So when she didn't say anything more, I said, "Oh, there's a secret here. There's something that this family is keeping. It's taboo." And of course, being a journalist, I wanted to find out what it was. So I started searching around, and I said to Philippe, "Oh, what is this about your aunt in the war?" And he said, "I don't know, because from the time I was little, you just bring up her name and nobody would talk." So I said, "Well, this is incredible. We have to find out." So we did start looking around and found out a few things. And then, excuse me, we weren't getting very far. And one day, it was the day that my in-laws celebrated their 50th wedding anniversary in their pretty apartment in Paris. But Paris apartments are not the size of American houses, and the living room was small. And there was an elderly gentleman friend of theirs at the party who started talking to me. And we were just talking. And all of a sudden, he starts saying to me, "Oh, that was bad business about," referring to the sister. And I said, "Oh my goodness, I'm going to hear the story now." And then all of a sudden, I looked across the room, it wasn't very far, and I put two and two together. And that was that he was an elderly gentleman who was deaf. And like many deaf people, he was speaking very loudly, very loudly. And that if I allowed him to tell me that story, which I was dying to know about, it would ruin my mother-in-law's wedding anniversary. And I couldn't do that. So I changed the subject. And that was just horrible. But it was a good thing and a bad thing. I was proud of myself for being a moral human being. And I was disappointed. But actually, what it taught me was that I wasn't going to get a lot of information about this story, and that in any case, this would never be a nonfiction story, what I'm used to writing. But we continued investigating anyway. And my husband and I went down to the Périgord. I don't know if all of you there know or have been to the Périgord in Southwest France. Well, we went down there to the little village in which my mother-in-law grew up with her family. And we went to the village where this happened. And we did our investigation. And so I'll tell you more about that investigation and what happened later. But that was the beginning of this story. And it was a story that just called out to me to write.
And so the story that just called out to you, where does the action take place and when specifically? Because it spans many different regions and time periods.
You're right. It spans a lot. Well, Séverine is born in 1911. And so it goes on for about 30 some years. So it's not just the story of the war. The war's at the end of the book. But at the beginning of the book, we have the Périgord in the 1920s, and then we go to Paris in the 30s, and then back to Périgord in the 40s. So yeah, a Périgord, for those of you who haven't been there, it is a wonderful magical kingdom. Périgord is the ancient name of what is also called Dordogne. And the Périgord is filled with thick oak forests, and that has its importance in my story. And it's also the land of foie gras, prehistoric ruins, etc. It's a fabulous place. I recommend it for a visit. I don't recommend it for what happened in my story, but I recommend it for a touristic visit. So.
And so you got this story from your family, your French family. For those of you who don't know, Harriet has the most fabulous French husband there is to find in the whole country.
Oh, I'll tell him he can't hear.
But so being married to Philippe for so many years and being welcomed into this French family, what did you learn about French daily life in the war? And more specifically, did you see, like, did they ever get over the somewhat humiliation of being an occupied country for a while? How do they speak on it even decades later?
Okay, I think that is a really crucial and a very good question. And I have so many stories that I heard at the dinner table at my in-laws' place that I don't even know I could begin to start. I will only tell a few, and then we could go to the slides and I can answer some of your other questions, Maggie, on that with the slides.
Yes.
Well, for one thing, my in-laws spoke a lot about the war when we were at those family lunches out in the countryside near Paris, where they have a country house. One thing they would say was that there was a curfew and the German soldiers were patrolling outside, and there was as I said, there was a curfew, lights out, not supposed to go out of your house. And of course they did, they broke it. But it wasn't a good idea, because if you broke a curfew, you might end up in jail. And if you ended up in jail and just that day there'd been some kind of some attack on a German soldier or something like that, and they were taking hostages, you might get taken hostage and killed. So that's an example of how war is no fun, that you have to be very careful, like Séverine was not always. So that's one thing. The other thing, my mother-in-law, of course, she was a wonderful cook and a wonderful hostess. And she told me a story about food, that she said she, who can eat everything, she could never bring herself to eat a rabbit anymore after the war, because during the war, animals which were presented as rabbits were actually cats, and you never knew what you were eating actually. So there were story after story after story. These are maybe small stories. There are bigger stories to tell too. But I think we can go to the slides now, and that'll shed some light more on your questions.
There we go. And are they up?
Okay, you got it. Okay, I don't know if you've seen this photo over here with the man watching the German troops on parade. It's a very famous photo. And what is the expression on his face? He's stunned, he's appalled, he's aghast. He cannot believe that his country has been invaded. It's just such a moving photo, I think. And then this picture on the other side of the page are the German troops marching down the Champs-Élysées. So what I would ask you to imagine, because it's hard to imagine, but it would be kind of like America being invaded by China and having Chinese troops marching down Park Avenue. How would you feel? Well, you'd feel like this man feels. It's just a disaster, but it's happened. So if you want to go to the next slide. Yeah, okay, what happened? Well, now we're going to be in a period of deprivation, because the Germans have made the rules, and they've taken the best for themselves, the best food, the best material, the best everything the French have, and they left the crumbs to the French. So the French have ration tickets, and they go and they queue up for their food, and they don't have coal, and they don't have material for clothes, and especially France have the most stringent restrictions on food of all the countries that were occupied. The normal daily recommended calories for an adult, it's about 2,000 calories, and it was half of that in France. So You know, you always see all those French are so slim. Well, during the war, they were really slim because it was very hard to get enough food and good food. It was hard for the children. It was hard for everybody. So the occupation brought in a very hard life for the Parisians, for the French, all of the French. They are now in a German country. I don't know if I point on these slides or not. They're when they're walking down the street, they see street signs that are in German. I'll go back to the analogy with the Chinese. It's like you're walking down a street in Memphis and all of a sudden all the signs are in Chinese. You can't read a word. And in France, the clocks were put on Berlin time. So back to our Chinese, so you'd be on Chinese time, I suppose. I won't go too far with this analogy, but you can imagine how strange it is to be in your own country and see this. And you have all these signs saying, your family will be happy, go work in Germany, or trust the German soldier. Okay, so we're in a German country and it's very uncomfortable. There were many other posters all over the walls, and there were posters that Séverine saw about the Marshal Pétain, the travail, famille, patrie, famille, that made her very happy, actually, Séverine, because it gave her a good excuse to tell her husband that if he would follow Pétain and what he's telling people to do, they would have a baby and a family. Of course, her husband doesn't want to, so this is just a way of arguing. But anyway, so there we are in a German country, and there's a slide after that and not only are you, a collaborationist government. This is a famous picture of Marshal Pétain shaking the hand of Hitler. Marshal Pétain, for those of you who don't know, but I imagine you all do, was the hero of the Great War of World War I, and he was quite admired and even beloved by some people. Pétain thought that by collaborating, he might get a better deal for the French. It was bad enough to be defeated, but at least he might get something for him. Of course, he was totally wrong, and it was a puppet government, and he did the bidding of the Germans. And the German rule and Vichy brought in horrible things like the statue of the Statue des Juifs on the 3rd of October 1940, when Jews were no longer allowed to be in the army or be a member of press corps or have businesses, etc. And this other slide over here, the exhibition, The Jew in France, 1941. This is a real exhibition that took place in Paris at the Palais Berlitz. And as you see, it says Le Juif et la France. And it was an exhibition of about the identity. Who are these Jewish people? Who are they? What are they like? And it was filled with every cliche, every stereotype. I mean, I've seen pictures of what was in the exhibition, and it's insulting, it's degrading, it's everything you can imagine it would be. And I have two of my characters in the book. I put them in this scene, and you'll have to read the book to find out what happened. But this is also to show you that in my book, I take real things that happened and I put my fictional characters within those situations. So now we've got another one after that. So what do you do if the Chinese come and invade you, or if the Germans come and invade France as they did? Do you resist? Like, are you a good guy? Do you resist? Do you just go, what? I'm going to resist? Or do you collaborate? Do you decide, well, since they're here and they've taken over, I might as well just get along with them? Or are you in the middle? And I should have put something right here on that slide, right in the middle, because 80% of the population was in the middle. We can't all be heroines and we can't all be villains. And most people were kind of in between. Okay. By the way, I put Maquis and milice. I can explain those words later if you don't know what they are. But briefly, the milice is the militia that was created by the Vichy regime. And these guys with the big floppy berets there, they were the collaborators with the Nazis. The Maquis were the people outside the small rural towns that went into the Maquis. Maquis is like I was saying, thick oak forests thick forest underbrush, and they would hide out there. The Nazis could not find them because they were so hidden away. So maquisards or collaborations, or in the middle. Okay, last, I'll finish this now. You've probably seen this famous photo too. This was a photo taken by Robert Capa, the famous photographer, in Chartres, where the cathedral is, in 1944 at the end of the war. We see this woman who's had her head shaved. I hope you can see it. She's holding a baby in her arms. You see all the people around her that are laughing and jeering and just having a good old time, insulting and humiliating her. And there were legions of scenes like this at the end of the war, when people wanted to make other people pay for their bad conduct in the war. So that's a very famous photo. At least this person got out with her life, because in other scenes that we don't see, and what I talked about in my book, suspected collaborators were just taken out and shot. And there were 10,000 suspected collaborators who were killed without trial in France at the end of the war, which is a stunning figure. And it's not something that people talk about outside of France. Inside of France, they do. Okay, so we'll leave these slides now and go back to our questions, and then have questions from the audience.
So my next question is, you mentioned how you and your husband went down to the Périgord to do some research on not only what occurred in his family, but the region and etc. So I'm wondering about your research methods. What exactly did you do to really grab this historical context that the book is really well grounded in?
Okay, thank you, Maggie. We did go down there, and I did what I did as a journalist. I went to see people and interview them. We went to the archives. We had a real little investigation going on down there. I was surprised to see how present the war still is in the minds of people who live in those small villages. People, especially the people who were of the generation who, I mean, they're old now. I mean, they lived through it, and their children. And I was surprised to see, and we were really amazed to see, we interviewed a man. We didn't interview him. We chatted briefly with a man who came out of his house in the village where these events happened. And we just said, something happened here with my husband's aunt, and blah, blah. And he asked us a few questions. And then it was quite obvious that he was of the age to be one of the persons involved in this. And he did very shortly leave and go back in his house, and we never saw him again for the entire weekend. Okay, then we went to see the mayor of the little village, and he told us many, many, many stories about this event. And at the end of it, he said, please do not let this out of this room. This is a taboo. This was like 70 years ago. Okay, so it was just fascinating to be down there. And these people live together in small villages. So if you wonder why the French are all friendly and happy and smiley, because a lot of people know a lot about other people and what they were doing in the war, and they have to live in the same place. So that was something very interesting I discovered. I discovered a lot more, but I'll have to cut it off there. Yeah.
So you said like how they still felt very connected to the event 70 years ago. Would you say in general that the French think of the war as distant and that they've recovered from the emotional toll of it? Or would you say that the French in general, regardless of even in the small towns, it's still very much at the center of their hearts?
Well, I think that it's a center of the heart, certainly for the people in my mother-in-law's and my father-in-law's generation. Absolutely. Even in my husband, who is the age of 78. We can't believe that, can we, Maggie?
No, not at all.
He's 78. It's very present in his mind.
Mm-hmm.
The younger generation, yes, they know, but they're at a remove from it. So it's not quite the same thing. But it is, of course, the whole reason that de Gaulle, created. People kind of scornfully say sometimes, yes, everybody was a resistant, but de Gaulle had to do that. He really had to do it because it was so, there were so many groups of resistance, and everything was just such a mess. And the national pride was so hurt that he had to do something dramatic to make them rise above the horrible defeat and humiliation.
So now we've talked about a lot of the end of the book in the middle and the very tragic, kind of depressing parts of the book. So let's go to the beginning, which if you've read the book, you've seen how it's divided into three parts, the first being paradise. So on a different note, why did you call the first part paradise, and what exactly is paradise for the main character, Severine?
Okay, now I don't know how we're doing on time for me to talk. Do we have another, what, 5 or 10 minutes? Because
I think so.
okay,
Yes, looking at
yeah,
time.
I don't want to go beyond my time because I'd like to have some questions too. But paradise, yes. Well, I wanted to read a little excerpt. When Severine's a little girl, her grandmother dies, and she's very sad because she loves her grandmother. And so she comes home from school, and her sister Caroline is comforting her. And here's what she says to her. She says, "Maymay is in paradise now, and soon we will be too." And Severine says, "Are we going to die?" And she wanted to go to where Maymay was. "No," Caroline replied as she gave her a reassuring hug, "but we are leaving this place. Mama and Papa have been hired to work at the castle in Sorignac. They told me today it's just like paradise." She began describing Sorignac. The streets were lined with gold, she told her sister. The countess was a beautiful and benevolent queen, and the castle was something straight out of their fairy tale books. Best of all, she said, they would live in their very own cottage, in a room of their own, under a sloping thatched roof. Severine didn't believe a word about the gold-lined streets or the benevolent queen. She knew for a fact that she would rather have a living, breathing Maymay than an absent Maymay looking down at them from heaven. But she sensed that the part about the cottage was true, and she especially liked the idea of sharing a bedroom with her sister. Severine was capable of fantasy, to be sure, but she was also logical. Without Maymay, their tiny 3-room house was no longer home. So that was paradise, when she's going to go to paradise. And she always has these feelings about the place she moved in the castle. For her, it's paradise.
So with the castle in Sorignac, there are plenty of scenes with this benevolent queen, the countess, and we see her take Severine under her wing, and then we see Severine kind of move up the social classes. And even in the chat, someone has already pointed out that class differences are emphasized. Would you say that the main character, Severine, is a social climber? And how would you say that plays out within the book?
No, Severine is not a social climber. Severine is chosen. She's chosen by the countess. The countess admires her high spirits. One day, I shouldn't give away all this stuff because you'll never read the book. But one day the countess finds her kind of going through her goods in her closet. She's got an enormous closet, all kinds of clothes and stuff. And Severine is she'd been there with her mother who was cleaning, and she kind of starts going through she's putting on her gloves and stuff. And the countess discovers her, and she reads her the riot act. But Severine, who bursts out into tears, also stands up to her in a very clever way. That I won't tell you how, but she stands up to her, and the countess likes that. And she takes her under her wing, and she chooses her, and she gets her piano lessons, and she educates her, and she tells her how to put on perfume. I mean, the countess really brings her up. And so she's chosen by the countess, and she's chosen by her upper class husband too. She doesn't, make a play for her husband. He chooses her. So she's someone, I call her the chosen one in a way. Mm-hmm.
And going off that, would you say that in France today, social classes are still very rigid? How would you compare it even to those of us from the States? Would you say it's quite different how social classes are emphasized?
Oh yeah, I think it's very different because in France, people know who they are and to what group they belong. And when you meet a new person, you're always kind of, you don't ask them what they do or how much money they make. You want to know where they fit in the social structure. Maybe is the person above me, below me, equal to me? It's just something I'm always asking my husband, who is that guy? When he knows what I mean, so we'll discuss that. I would never do that in the States. But it can lead to some kinds of things, and then I'll quit being so lengthy, but it can lead to real cultural problems. For example, I've always been very lucky to have cleaning help. And in the beginning, especially, I was the way with my cleaning lady that I am with everybody. That's to say friendly, even palsy, and, well, this does not wash. She thought I was the biggest sucker in the history of the world. And she took me for a ride. I mean, I can't tell you. And I see many Americans doing this because that's the way we equality, you know, but I'm sorry, it doesn't work. And the day I decided to be like the French, it all just solved itself. So
I can definitely relate. And that to me too.
great.
So we're meeting here with you. We want to know about the author. So aside from what's actually in the book, I want to know about how you wrote the book. What was the process like? You said it took a while, but did you go at it little bits every day, big chunks at one time? How did you approach it?
Well, I'm embarrassed to tell you how long it took me. When I came to Memphis in 2013, I'd been working on that book for 5 years. So you can kind of put that together, but working not, I mean, I wrote another book in the meantime, but still it was always in the back of my mind. Always, always, always. I was creating the characters. I was Excel spreadsheets with the names of the characters and their dates of birth and their dates of death and where they were. I mean, I was obsessed by this story. So it took me a long time. It really did. But I worked when I could, and I worked in spurts, and, you know, it was always in my mind. So, yeah, that's, well, I think, did you have another question about that maybe?
I was just going to follow up with, what did you think was the hardest part of writing the book?
Oh, okay. The hardest part about it was the total guilt. I felt like, you know how they say in some cultures, they think that if you're taking a picture of somebody, it steals their soul. Well, I felt like taking a member of my husband's family and writing about this person whom I didn't know personally at all. I felt like I was infringing on something that was not mine to infringe upon. And so I lived with this guilt on my shoulders all the time. It was always with me. Always, always, always with me. And it didn't go away until really the book was published. That's a long time.
That's a long time to have that on your shoulders.
You're telling me.
Well, now that the book is finished, it's published, it's out there, do you have hopes for one lesson that it has taught readers? And conversely, what is one lesson you think writing this book taught you?
I think the lesson that I learned is that revenge disguised as justice is our most horrendous grimace, which are the words of François Mauriac. And that's what I took away from it. And I think that in these days in the States, when we have so much civil, what's the word? I almost said civil
Unrest.
unrest, civil unrest. I think we would be well advised to be very careful about how we act, because Severine acts in a way that is not good. She's not an evil person, but she acts in a stupid way, an unthinking way, and she will pay for it dearly. And she will pay for it with people who don't observe, you know, this thing about revenge and justice. That's what I would take away from it. Mm-hmm.
Interesting. Well, yes, there are definitely some parallels from then to now, curfew included.
Yeah, absolutely. Here we are in our little houses and we can't go out.
We turn into a pumpkin at 9 o'clock. So that's the end of my questions. Now I was going to turn to some in the chat, which are very good, I must say. Thank you to all of you who submitted a question. The first one, I don't think we can answer. It's asking what was the final transgression, but there's one similar that I think we can answer, which is, how did you come up with the title of Final Transgression?
Well, I cannot give you the final transgression, of course, because that would be giving away the whole book. How did I come up with the title? Because it's absolutely what it is. That's what it is. I mean, that's what the whole book is about. It's a transgression.
Did you toy around with any others before you settled on Final Transgression?
Yeah, I play around with some others, but it just kind of, well, the funniest thing is, for a long time, it was Transgression. And every time people would say, oh, you're working on a book, what's the title? And I'd say, oh, I have a temporary title, it's Transgression. And nobody ever said, oh, you know, they showed no sign of interest. So I said, well, there's something wrong with that title. And it was only until, about a month before it got published that I said, oh, it's Final Transgression. And it all came together. Yeah. So
it has a punch to it. I understand that.
It's not something that,
Marion had a very good question that I've never even asked you. What was your hardest scene to write? And if you can't tell us all the details, just a
Oh,
little.
no, I'll tell you the hardest scene. I am a very, what is the word? And the word in French would be pudique. I'm reserved, and I had a horrible time writing a scene where Antoine is in bed with this woman. Oh, I was blushing as I wrote.
You have to type into your inner E.L. James or something.
Oh my goodness. So I said, oh, okay, I guess I'm not cut out for that. But I did it. But that was hard. Yeah.
Okay. And Susan Huston wants to know what part of the family story is not in the book. And I like this part. What was Philippe's family's reaction to the book?
Okay. Oh, what part of the family story is not in the book?
Yes. And then how did the family react?
Okay. Well, when you fictionalize something, you pick and choose. So I picked things that really happened, and I picked places that really were there, and I disguised them. But then I also made up I made up characters who weren't there. They weren't there.
Mm-hmm.
I made up Paul. I made up Luke, but they could have been there. They probably were there actually. So, things like that. And then what was the second question to start?
How did the family react to the book after you had all this guilt on your shoulder for a decade?
Well, they didn't react because I didn't tell them. Because if you tell somebody you're writing a book about their family, you're asking permission, and you cannot ask permission to write what you're going to write. You have it on you. That's why I said I had all that guilt on me. It was my responsibility. So I didn't tell them. And for I loved my mother-in-law and my father-in-law very much, and I would never hurt them. And in any case, I never would have published it while they were alive. And it took me so long to write this book that unfortunately, they are no longer here. So the only people left really to tell were my sister-in-law. And I was afraid of her because she's even worse than I am in terms of being reserved and not saying things. Said, oh my goodness. But, at the end, I said, okay, Philippe, you tell her. And well, which I wanted him to, because it was a family thing and it was a French thing. And so he said, listen, Harriet's writing a book about blah, blah. And you know what? I had years of guilt on me. And she said, oh, that's okay. Years of guilt. And she says, it's okay. And then we also told the person after whom this woman is named, the same thing. Can you imagine? And same thing. But her reason was because she doesn't want to revisit the past.
Mm.
And
you were braced, you were ready for it.
Yeah. Well, the third thing that happened is they don't speak English. Mm. It might be different. If this book comes out in French, they might all of a sudden revise their opinion about the whole thing. Not that they could really, I changed it so much, but I mean, the bare bones, yeah. They could.
Mm-hmm. Interesting. Well, Elizabeth has a very interesting question. She just finished the TV series, A French Village. Have you seen it?
Oh, yes.
Everyone's been recommending it to me. I haven't seen it. But she says, was the series popular in France? Yes. But do you think there has been a renewed interest in France's World War II history?
Yes, absolutely. Greatly renewed interest in World War II history. Le Village Français was very, very popular. People loved that series, and for good reason. It showed the complexity of the occupation, for one thing. And I have so many books that, speaking of research for this, I have a library of books written in French, mostly, about World War II, the occupation, everything. And I'm always surprised people say, oh, the French never wanted to talk about the occupation. They talked a lot about it, actually, on talk shows and things, but they aren't things that we Americans would know about. So, yeah.
Interesting. Mm-hmm. And then this one I like a lot. How do you select the names of your characters?
Oh my goodness, that's a really good question.
Never heard that one asked to you before.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I got to tell you one thing about the name of the Countess. She must have changed her name at least 6 times. She became Giselle kind of in the last draft of it. but she was Jeanne for a while, and then that didn't sound enough like a countess, and et cetera, et cetera. Let me see. Well, I picked names that seem to go well with the personality traits of the people in my mind. And Severine is just a name. It rhymes with queen, and to me, she had queenly qualities, and et cetera, things like that, reasons like that. Mhm.
That makes a lot of sense.
Mhm.
I'm getting two people actually asking for you to restate the quote about revenge disguised as justice. I'm going to type it in the chat for them because apparently it's really taking.
Okay, fine. Revenge disguised as justice is our most horrendous grimace.
Grimace. There we go. People really like that quote. So there it is.
Yes, and they will see it if they look it up in French, there are different translations of it, our most horrid grimace, etc. But there are different ways of translating, but that's what I used.
Okay. And a little clarification question from Juliet. She says, so your sister-in-law hasn't actually read the book. Luckily, it was not your sister-in-law a few generations back. I think the main character in the book was not based off your sister-in-law, right? It was
no, the main character was based on an aunt.
Yes.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. And
So,
my sister-in-law, Philippe's sister, has not read the book because it's in English and it's hard for her to do. So, oh, she's saying.
And then Otto would like to know. Otto would like to know. You showed some historic photos on the slides. There are no pictures in your book. Was that a tactical decision? Do you think pictures would have enhanced the book or no?
Oh, thank you for that question. No, I did it on purpose. I think the book stands alone. And I like to have the pictures when I talk about the book, but I think people form images in their mind, or at least I do when I read. They don't need the pictures.
I see. And I don't have any more questions coming into the chat. So my last question for you, someone did mention that they would like to see a sequel.
Oh, I would too.
What are your thoughts on that?
I would too. But do they have any suggestions about what they would like to learn about?
I can say, if you have any suggestions about what you would like to see more, please let us know. If you're lucky, you'll see it in the sequel. And so I think that's all we have in the chat questions. Harriet, if there's anything else you want to say, I'll turn this over to you.
Okay, well, I do want to say thank you so much for inviting me. It's been a real pleasure to be with you.
Well,
I'm sorry that I couldn't turn on the gallery view while I was talking because I get too distracted. But I would thank each and every one of you individually. I'm sorry if there were questions that you asked and we didn't get time to answer. You can certainly ask them to Teresa and I'll get back to you. And I just want to say thank you for a lovely evening.
Okay, everyone, Otto, you can turn off unmute everyone and we can all clap.
Oh.
If everybody's unmuted.
Bravo.
Well,
Bravo.
and
Thank you so much.
Discuss the end of the book.
Yeah.
Are we going to discuss the ending?
Okay. Do we have a couple of minutes for that? I would like to invite anybody who has not read it and doesn't want a spoiler to leave the room. You just hit the red leave button, and then I know that several of you have questions about the end of the book because I've been getting questions about it, and I said I can't speak to it. So I would like to invite anybody who doesn't want to hear about the end of the book to go ahead and leave the room. And let me see if anybody's doing that. Well, a few have left. Oh, some are leaving. Okay. And I might mention also that the book is in our Mediothèque. It will be in our Mediothèque after tomorrow, but or you can order it at Novel or on Amazon. Okay. I think we lost about 8 people. Okay, should we put that in the chat, questions about the ending? Susan, I think you had one. probably be better if we were all muted and then just put it into the chat. If you have questions about that, the ending, yes, just write it into the chat or is Linda there, Linda Patterson? Because she had a very good question, I thought, or a comment at one point.
She's there.
Okay.
I've got to unmute.
Oh, there. Okay,
I
Linda.
just wondered if you considered the ending to be a very French ending,
Oh,
if that's a expression.
I'm sorry. I couldn't hear the end of your prayers. Yeah.
Do you consider the ending to be a very French ending?
Oh, if I consider the ending to be a French ending, yeah, a French ending in the sense of it not living happily ever after.
Well, not exactly that, because I'm not particularly a fan of everything ending happy ever after, but it just surprised me a little,
I would.
or I had more questions. So I don't know.
Well,
What Linda had told me, she said, I don't know much about French literature, but I've seen some French films. And when the ending of the book was like, bam, just like the French films where you see a scene and you think there's another scene, but no, they're the credits. And it's like,
right.
Oh my gosh, what happened?
Right. Well, that must be it. Yeah. That's it. That's it. I must have seen too many French films.
I enjoyed the book.
Yeah. You really enjoyed it.
Thank you.
Hey, Todd, did you have a question? I keep seeing you pop up here. Hickmott? No. Let me see how many people have left. Okay, we're down to 30. That's okay. There's still 30 people there. Does anybody else?
I have a question.
Yes.
Paul arranged for her to go out in an isolated area by herself with no protection. And I'm wondering if she had thought of other scenarios to end it before coming upon that one.
Oh, you're wondering if I had thought of different scenarios for the ending of the book with maybe her not being alone or something?
Yes, yes.
Mm-hmm. Right. No, actually I hadn't.
Well, I mean, it just seemed like Paul maybe would have gotten someone to stay with her, or, I know he couldn't have handed her a gun probably, but to protect herself.
I see what you mean. I don't think that they knew that she was in great danger. She'd received a coffin.
Right.
But, at the same time, they were just, kind of banking on the time that they would have to get her out of there. So yeah, I didn't have her accompanied by somebody. I didn't really think about it, actually.
And I like what you did with Luke.
Pardon me?
I like what you did with Luke.
Oh, you did? Okay, great. Thank you. Thank you. I'm glad. These characters are just, they come alive all by themselves, and they kind of do things by themselves, and you watch them do it. I'd always heard people say that. I'd always heard fiction writers say that. And I said, oh, that's not possible. But it does happen. Not all the time, but sometimes, yeah.
And
I have a question.
I was going to say, and I liked how the person who betrayed her was Paul's mother.
Yes. Oh, yes.
He's the most villainous
thought
of
that
all.
made it very genuine and very personal, and brought together all those threads very well.
Oh, thank you. Huguette was quite a character. Huh? I have great sympathy and compassion for all my characters. I understand Huguette, but I can't bring myself to
Like her.
approve or like her.
Hello. I
Yes.
would like to piggyback on the Luke character, which made me ask you the question, which one is the final transgression? Her snub of Luke was horrible and never addressed by Severin. It's just that when he killed her, I was still surprised
You were surprised that he killed her?
that he actually did it.
Well, she pushed him just one time too many.
Was that what you call the final?
Well, see, this is a good question. And people have different theories on that. I have one woman who told me, but that was a final transgression, but there were a lot of transgressions in that book. And then she started pointing them out to me one by one.
It was a lot of
The final transgression for me, it's interesting. It wasn't Luke killing her. It was her going against all that she'd been taught by the Countess.
Yes.
And hanging out in the bar with the Germans,
very
acting out of character and acting stupidly. She'd been taught she'd been taught to control herself better than that. And I think she went just too far on that. For me, that was it. But for other people who read it, it might be.
I did not know that. I'm glad I asked.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you for asking.
Yeah.
Are there
You-
any?
So
Well,
did you,
Huguette, I think Huguette could she was quite a strong character, and it's almost as if her revenge against her husband, toward her husband, is actually manifested in her revealing Severine's location.
Yeah, it's a terrible thing to do.
Yeah.
I mean, it's really very, very bad. She had a set of problems, Huguette. She was losing it. She was losing everything that she built up, because don't forget, Huguette came from a pretty humble family herself.
That's right. That's right.
So she was losing everything, and she just got desperate.
Yeah.
That's pretty desperate to do what she did.
so
Yeah.
can you say who betrayed Philippe's aunt and how she died, or is that too personal?
It is personal, but it's also those facts aren't clear. They're almost clear, but not quite. And it wasn't one person. It was a group of people, a group of people who had done some bad things. And I think she might have spoken out of turn, kind of like Severine, and I think she spoke out of turn, and they were afraid that maybe they were going to be denounced or something. And that's how it happened. But yeah, it's too difficult to go into, because even we still don't know every single detail on that.
Can you ever imagine in later time putting that story, her account, together in a nonfiction way? Just because I think it's so powerful.
Yes.
It comes down to someone who actually that happened to.
Well, in the beginning, I wanted to. I'm a nonfiction writer, so I've written many, many articles in newspapers and magazines. I'm used to writing nonfiction. I wanted, my first instinct was to write that as a nonfiction, but I just couldn't get enough of a hold on the facts. To write nonfiction, you really have to have the facts. You can't make things up. And this lent itself to making things up. When it's ambiguous like that, you don't have everything you need. You just, I don't know. I worked for Time magazine for a long time, for about 10 years. And we had fact checkers. And we were so obsessed with getting the facts right that I have a little kind of a thing about that. So I just can't write things if I don't have justification. And, it's like putting footnotes on the bottom of the page or something.
So her story's out there to be told maybe a generation from now.
Yeah, probably. Probably. You're right.
Okay, I think our hour is almost up, and this has been delightful. We really, it was very informative. I feel I need to go back and reread the book now too, because of some of the things. Because I read it a month ago. He just finished this week and wanted to engage me in conversation about it. I said, oh my gosh, I've got to go back and read it.
You got to reread it.
Need to reread
what? I have to go back and reread it too.
Yeah.
Mhm.
So it
If-
really,
If I
really
may,
to learn, makes
if
you
I
want to
may,
learn.
outside of the book,
Mhm.
a question I have for you is any relation to Eudora Welty?
Oh, that's a question that I have been asked many, many times, especially when I was an English major in college, and all my English professors wanted to know if I was related to Eudora Welty. And I am now happy to tell them, because I couldn't at the time, that yes, I am.
Oh,
I am.
the writing gene is there.
Yeah.
Of course, she was fiction, so she was very good. with
She
her
was
fiction.
a wonderful writer.
Oh, loved her. One of my favorites. Yes. Well, thank you again, Harriet. And I want to remind everyone, I will put it into the e-flash that Harriet will be speaking again for the AFUSA in November. It's on their website. I guess you've seen that.
Yes.
And so if you read the book again or want to talk more about it or hear more about it, you will have that information too. So I want to thank you once again. And I did notice that one of the chat posts was to thank you for the signed book plate.
Oh, that was a pleasure.
Yeah.
I only have, thank you very much. I was happy to sign those book plates for you because I think it's nice to have those.
Very
just wanted to say one thing to those of you who have things to say about the book that you'd like to share with other people. You could write a little review on Goodreads or Amazon, or there are various places for that, because that helps a book become more known to other people.
Oh, yes, very good point. And we have some excellent writers in this
Oh,
organization.
I'm sure you do. I can tell that.
Yeah.
And if you want to follow Harriet more, she is now on Instagram at harriet.welty.rochefort.
Put that up there in the chat, Maggie.
Yes, I'll put that in the chat.
Okay.
Okay, right. And Facebook.
And Facebook.
And Facebook too.
So
Okay.
just,
And
I want to make sure,
and Twitter, but I never go on it.
could I make sure I got something right? So Felix is the son of Paul and Caroline,
Yes.
but I didn't guess that. I didn't see it coming. I like that. I liked that. And I don't think it's that unusual that two people are attracted to each other once they both lost someone very mutually important to them. So it seemed very realistic.
Oh, well, good.
That's the sequel.
Yeah,
The
there you go.
contents of the briefcase.
There you go. Okay.
Yes.
I got it. Okay. I'll think about that.
What about the ring, Severin's ring
Yes.
going to Luke's wife?
Yes.
I thought you made a very interesting statement, which sort of show the people don't want to talk about it.
Exactly. That's right.
It's
That's
still
exactly right.
there. And I think the ring shows that.
Yes, that's exactly what I wanted to do. And actually, in the real story, it wasn't a ring, it was something else.
Oh, sorry.
It wasn't a ring, but there was something like that, and people knew it, but they didn't want to talk about it at the same time.
Something that belonged to her. Yeah. Oh, wow.
Yeah. Well, this
So-
is great. Wow.
Yeah.
Fascinating.
So it's quite the story.
It is quite a story. And thank you for writing
Thank
it.
you.
Oh.
Thank you for being so enthusiastic and for asking such really interesting questions.
Uh-huh. Yes.
Now, are you going to a Pre-Midi soon, you said? Or
I'm going
somebody
to,
said?
I'm going to a Pre-Midi in February.
February. Oh, okay. Maybe the COVID will be over.
Oh, I hope so. Oh, I hope
COVID's over. We may be there with you in person.
so. That
Yeah,
would be
we
wonderful.
would fly over for that.
Come one, come all.
We would. We've been to
That would be-
those.
Yes. Oh, yeah. That's a lot of fun. It really is. Well, let's hope the COVID is over and we'll get together in Paris.
Yeah.
That's right. That's
definitely.
right.
Okay. Well, thank you again. And thank you,
you.
Otto, for taking care of the Zoom.
Yes, thank
You
you
all
all for taking care of
participating.
all of this. And
You're
thanks to
most
Maggie.
welcome. It was a pleasure.
Oh, thank you.
Yes, a real pleasure. Thank you.
Thank
Bye,
you.
everyone.
Delightful. Bye.
Au revoir.